pleasure for me to have with us today Ed Rybicki, who is a microbiologist based in the Department of Molecular and Cell Biology. Today we will talk about microbes and the fascinating world in which they've created for us.
Thanks for having me.
So one of the things that I've really been fascinated about is the fact that, we look at this rich biodiversity on our planet today, but we have to realize that it actually started 3.8 billion years ago. And I'm reminded of Charles Darwin's very famous quote at the end of his Origin of Species, where he says, "From so simple a beginning, endless forms have and are still being evolved."
And have been continuously in one stream from then. So everything we have right now is the same age, and it all started about 3.8 billion years ago.
Exactly. Why do you think it is that microbes have been so successful for all this time? Because they still are successful.
Well, they were around at the start. They are the origin of life. The origin of life itself is something that looked quite a lot like a bacterium. What we have now is 3.8 billion years worth of very sophisticated organism. They look simple, and people think they're primitive, but they're not. They're extraordinarily sophisticated because they've got rid of a lot of the stuff that other organisms have, like we. More than half of our genome doesn't look like it does anything. Bacteria have stripped it down. For example, bacteria and archaea, which are two completely different classes of organisms, have stripped things down so that, in fact, they are simple, but they're very sophisticated. That's how they manage to actually cope with all of the environments on this planet.
So highly adaptable. We know they can live on mountaintops and in deep ocean vents. They're really incredibly adaptable.
Oh, it's even better than that. They can live in the stratosphere. Really? And they can live kilometers down underneath the ocean floor.
Goodness, that's amazing. That's really quite something. So, when we think about, again, the simple organisms, we know that somewhere along the line, we had the development of organelles within cells. And I'm sure you're an expert on Lynn Margulis' work and about her idea about how this came to be.
Well, it's quite strange that people still think that what Margulis said is a theory. It's established fact. What happened is that at some point, 2 or more billion years ago, a bacterium ended up inside an archaea. And that may have been the origin of the nucleus, but even if it wasn't, if the two lines had separated sufficiently, a bacterium that produced energy ended up inside another archaeal cell. They're not bacteria, they're archaea. And gave it an energy source that otherwise it didn't have, and allowed it to become more complex. That was the origin of all eukaryotes.
Yes.
And eukaryotes are obviously all animals and all plants. But after that, you had a photosynthetic bacterium ended up inside another one of these organisms that has provided not once but several times the origin of photosynthesis in eukaryotes.
Yes.
The one event that we see all around us, the green plants.
Exactly.
That's one kind of alga that got inside a eukaryote. All of the other kinds, there are several different origins for chloroplasts.
Yes. So, but the cyanobacteria are the beginning of this photosynthetic group of organisms. And we know that when they evolved, they were such an important step in the evolution of life on Earth. And maybe you can tell us why.
Well, they call it the Great Oxidation Event. So if you go and look at rocks, you'll notice that if you go back through time, at one point there was no oxygen freely available. And after a certain time, there began to be, and then it proceeded to explode, literally. That was the development of cyanobacteria and their ancestors. Because what we see now, the descendants of those original bacteria, it was a useful way to harvest energy. You had the sun blazing down, giving you free energy. They managed to start tapping into that. That gave them an enormous evolutionary advantage over literally everything else. But at the same time, it provided enormous biomass for everything else. In fact, bacteria have engineered our planet in terms of geomorphology. A lot of rocks depend on the fact that there were bacteria around.
But also oxygen in the environment, because that was one of the most important steps, is the oxidation of the atmosphere, which gave other organisms an opportunity to develop as well. So very, very important. So, one of the very well-known evolutionary biologist, Stephen Jay Gould, has said that today we live in the age of bacteria. Do you agree with that statement?
I think he should have said we have always lived in the age of bacteria, and we always will.
And why do you say that?
Because they're central. You carry around 1.5 kilograms of bacteria inside you.
Exactly. And on my skin, isn't
absolutely.
it? Exactly. There's more bacteria on me than my own body cells. Is that correct?
No, it's about even.
It's about even.
It's about 1-to-1.
Okay.
But if you didn't have them, you wouldn't be making vitamin B, for example. They break down a lot of different things in your gut that otherwise would just pass through unchanged. So you're benefiting from it and they're benefiting from it. So we have a mutual symbiosis with a very, very wide array of bacteria. And so does every single other animal that's got an alimentary canal on this planet.
That's really interesting. And I think it's important for us to realize that bacteria are not just things that cause plague and that cause diseases. And, there's lots of benefit that they also give us as well. So
we humans are selfish. We tend to study what makes us sick or what benefits us.
Yes.
And that is a tiny, tiny fraction of the entire world of bacteria.
Yeah.
And if you've been reading Nature News recently, for example, you realize that the speculation that there's life in oceans on other planets in the solar system, and moons especially, so Europa, Enceladus, and possibly even Titan, have got enough liquid water inside them
that could sustain,
given the same kind of origins that life on Earth came from, which is deep ocean vents probably, then you very possibly have earlier development of life there because these places were cooler than the Earth at the same time. So we may well have been colonized by them.
Well, I know the idea about the development of life from outer space. So panspermia hypothesis. It's a very, very well-known hypothesis. And I was thrilled recently to visit Adelaide Museum and see the Murchison meteorite, the one that actually had so many amino acids on it. It was like to go and pay homage to this little rock that came from outer space. It was wonderful. But thank you very much for joining us today. It's been fascinating to talk about microbes. I think we've all learned so much, and I think you've opened our minds to the wonderful world of microbes. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.